Rosie was soaking naked in a luxurious bath when the chamber door opened and the Alpha King filled the doorway. He stared at the drunken maid in stunned silence, then demanded to know what she was doing there. Rosie, too tipsy to understand the danger, only smiled and invited him to get in. By morning she had vanished, and the most feared alpha in the palace was searching for her. What he believed about that night would turn one reckless mistake into something neither of them could simply escape. Chapter 1. Rosie realized, with the kind of clarity that only arrived when it was already too late to matter, that none of this would have happened if she had ever learned how to say no. It was such a simple word. 2 letters. 1 syllable. Children used it constantly, and yet Rosie somehow could never find it when she needed it. If she had known how to say no, she would not have accepted the second glass of wine during the servants' celebration in the palace kitchens. Or the third. And she most certainly would not have accepted the 5th. But refusing people meant disappointing them, and Rosie had always felt as though disappointing someone meant she had personally failed at being a decent human being. So when her friend Marta threw an arm around her shoulders and said, "Come on, Rosie, when are we ever going to taste wine this expensive again?" What was Rosie supposed to do? Make Marta sad? Impossible. Besides, the wine really was exceptionally good. Around them, the palace kitchens were alive with laughter. Anne had laughed so hard that she had nearly slid off her stool. Patrick was refilling cups. Servants who usually spent their days rushing from one duty to another were finally relaxing. It was summer, unbearably hot, and somewhere upstairs in the great hall, nobles and visiting dignitaries were discussing political alliances and other matters that servants were not expected to understand. Down in the cool kitchens, however, the staff had created a celebration of their own with the wine they had somehow managed to acquire from the royal cellars. Patrick suddenly lifted his cup. "No, to Princess Parisa." Everyone looked toward him. "Poor woman," he continued solemnly, "marrying that terrifying bastard for the good of the kingdom." "The visiting lord," Marta whispered dramatically beside Rosie. "Nobody's properly seen him yet, but the stories about him are dreadful." "They say he had a man's hand cut off because the man spilled wine," Anne added. Rosie frowned. "Perhaps the princess loves him." The entire kitchen erupted into laughter. Rosie laughed too, though in her current state she had already forgotten why. Then the door slammed open. Every sound died. Miss Harrow, the head housekeeper, stood in the doorway with fury written across her face. "A visiting lord," she said, each word frighteningly controlled, "requested refreshments be delivered to his chambers an hour ago." Silence. No one went. Every servant suddenly found something fascinating to study on the floor. Miss Harrow's expression hardened. There will be consequences if someone does not take them immediately. As one, every face turned toward Rosie. Rosie blinked. Of course. She was the helpful one, the dependable one, the one who could never say no. She stood. "I'll take them." Miss Harrow handed her the tray. "West wing. 3rd door on the left. Do not make this worse." "I won't," Rosie promised sincerely. As she headed for the door, Marta called after her. "Rosie." Rosie looked back. "If he's angry, just be yourself. You're so sweet he'll calm right down." "Tell him you love him," someone shouted. The kitchen exploded with laughter again. "Oh yes," Marta cried. "Rosie, do it, I dare you." "She'd never do it," Anne said. "Rosie doesn't know how to be daring." Rosie stopped in the doorway. She looked back at them. Boring? Was she really boring? She could not remember the last time she had done anything unexpected. The thought followed her into the corridor. West wing, 3rd door on the left. She could handle one simple delivery. And perhaps, just this once, she could prove she was capable of doing something daring. When Rosie reached the chamber, she found it empty. She stepped inside, then stopped. The room was enormous, far too grand for an ordinary guest chamber. The summer heat had turned most of the palace into an oven, and Rosie was already flushed from the wine and the walk. Then she saw the bath. It had already been prepared. Clear water waited inside a magnificent tub. Rosie stared. She had never had a bath like that in her entire life. A reckless, wine-warmed voice whispered inside her head. They called you boring. No one believes you would ever dare to do anything. Rosie looked around the empty chamber. Well, she murmured aloud. I will now. Her fingers went to the laces of her dress. They fumbled a little, but eventually the fabric slipped away. Cool air touched her skin. It felt wonderful. Freeing. The bath was right there. This was daring. This was what brave people did. At least, Rosie assumed so. She stepped into the water. Oh. It was perfect. Cool enough to soothe her overheated skin without being cold. Rosie sank deeper and released a pleased sound that would probably have been terribly undignified if anyone had been there to hear it. But she was alone. So it did not count. Her eyes drifted shut. For what felt like only a moment, Rosie forgot the servants, the dare, Miss Harrow, and the mysterious visiting lord entirely. When she opened her eyes again, a man was standing in the doorway. No, standing was not quite the right word. He seemed to fill the doorway. His shoulders were enormous, almost brushing the frame. He was tall, broad, and built with the kind of power that immediately identified him as an alpha. Rosie had never seen a man so large. He looked as if someone had carved him from a mountain and then somehow brought him to life. Her drunken mind supplied another observation. He could probably pick her up with one arm. The thought made Rosie giggle. Then she looked properly at his face. Oh, he was beautiful. Not merely handsome, beautiful. Dark hair, slightly disordered. Dark eyes fixed directly on her. A hard face made even more striking by the stunned expression currently occupying it. He looked completely shocked. Rosie found that strangely adorable. Who are you? His voice was deep and rough. Rosie stared. He spoke again, quieter this time. What are you doing in my bath? Rosie blinked. His bath? The alpha looked incredibly tense. His shoulders were rigid. His jaw was tight. Very tense, Alpha, Rosie's wine-soaked thoughts observed. He should relax. Baths were excellent for relaxing. Rosie was extremely relaxed. If he joined her, perhaps he would be too, and he would also have to be naked. That seemed like a considerable benefit. Well, he demanded, his voice dropping lower. I asked you a question. Rosie opened her mouth. She genuinely intended to explain herself. Something sensible. Something appropriate. Instead, she smiled at the enormous stranger and said, You should get in. Chapter 2. Luther had spent most of his adult life mastering the art of terrifying people without actually touching them. In his experience, it was more effective than violence, and considerably less messy. The possibility of violence, held behind perfect stillness, usually accomplished everything he needed. The nobleman standing before him now was proving that principle quite nicely. The supply reports were inaccurate, Lord Carrick said nervously. We've discovered several discrepancies. Someone has been stealing, Luther finished. Carrick swallowed. Yes, Your Majesty. How much? Approximately 40% of the grain shipments intended for the northern garrisons. Luther's expression did not change. Carrick hurried on. But we have identified the man responsible. Luther stood. Carrick immediately stepped backward. 50 lashes, Luther said quietly. Public. Tomorrow at dawn. Then exile. Relief flashed across Carrick's face. Yes, Your Majesty. I'll see to it personally. See that you do. Luther looked down at the reports. And Carrick? The nobleman froze. Fix your inventory system. If this happens again, our next conversation will be considerably less pleasant. Carrick bowed and disappeared with impressive speed. Lewis, Luther's attendant, appeared near his shoulder. Your dinner with Princess Parisa begins in 20 minutes. Luther's hand paused over the parchment. Lewis studied him. You should probably try to look less murderous, sir. Luther slowly raised his eyes. I don't look murderous. Lewis remained perfectly serious. You always look murderous. I believe it's your natural expression. Luther sighed. This is a political arrangement, Lewis. Neither the princess nor I is under any illusion that this marriage is about romance. The east dining room had been prepared with almost aggressive formality. Flowers covered the tables. Candles burned everywhere. Everything had been arranged to make two strangers feel as though they were participating in something intimate. Luther stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He waited. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then nearly an hour. Finally Lewis returned. She sends her apologies, Your Majesty. The princess says she's unwell. Luther's face remained still. He looked at his own reflection in the darkened glass. There he was. An alpha who had won 3 wars before his 30th birthday. A king whose reputation could empty a room. A man people whispered about before he even arrived. Of course she had not come. He knew exactly what women saw when they looked at him. A weapon wearing the shape of a man. Not someone they wanted to share dinner with. Luther left without another word. His chambers were dark when he returned. He opened the door, then stopped. There was a woman in his bath. A girl, really. Small, pretty, clearly unarmed. And completely naked. She was staring at him with such open, delighted surprise that Luther actually froze. Oh, she breathed. She looked pleased to see him. Nobody ever looked pleased to see him. Not like that. Luther frowned and glanced behind himself. The corridor was empty. He looked back. The girl was still there. What in all the hells are you doing here? She sighed dreamily. You have a very nice voice. Luther's mind stalled. That was not an answer. He tried again. This time, he allowed Alpha Command to enter his voice. I asked you a question. Normally that tone made grown men confess things he had never accused them of. The girl's reaction was entirely different. Her breath caught. Her pupils widened. Color spread across her cheeks. And her scent changed. Sweetened. Interested. Luther went very still. You should get in, she whispered. For several seconds, Luther's thoughts simply ceased functioning. Then the girl hiccuped. And with his sharper alpha senses, Luther finally identified the strongest note beneath her scent. Wine. A great deal of it. She was drunk. Very drunk. There was an intoxicated, naked woman sitting in his bath, inviting him to join her. Luther closed his eyes for one brief moment. He had commanded armies. He had negotiated treaties under threat of assassination. He had stood on battlefields surrounded by dying men. None of those experiences had prepared him for this. When he opened his eyes, she was still lounging in his bath as though appearing naked inside a strange man's chambers was an entirely ordinary way to spend an evening. Then an explanation struck him. Of course. She had to be Princess Parisa. Who else would dare enter his private chambers like this? The missed dinner suddenly made sense. She had been nervous. She had drunk too much wine to calm herself. Then she had gathered enough courage to come to him anyway. They were, after all, supposed to marry. Princess, Luther said carefully. The girl laughed. I'm a princess? Luther frowned. Are you not? She straightened with exaggerated dignity. Absolutely, my lord. Then she smiled at him. Your princess. She attempted to stand. Immediately she began tipping sideways. Luther moved before conscious thought could catch up. His hand shot forward and caught her arm before her head struck the edge of the tub. Protective instinct surged through him. He steadied her, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on her face, despite the alarming amount of information his peripheral vision was currently providing. He reached for his cloak and wrapped it around her body. Smells nice, she murmured, burying her face in the fabric. Then, even more softly, like you. Something primitive moved inside Luther's chest. His wolf responded instantly. She was wrapping herself in his scent, claiming it, claiming him in the unconscious language of wolves. She clearly had no idea what she was doing. His wolf did not care. It practically purred. The princess swayed when she tried to move. Luther decided walking was impossible. He simply lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her toward the bed while trying to determine what he should do next. Take her back to her rooms? No. If anyone saw her like this, she would be humiliated tomorrow. He could summon one of her attendants. Before he decided, she wrapped both arms around his neck. Then she pressed herself against his chest with complete, unquestioning trust. Luther stopped breathing. She was warm. Soft, curved in every place currently pressed against him. And Luther was painfully aware of every single point where their bodies touched. She nuzzled closer. A small, contented sound escaped her. Luther's control had never been infinite. At that moment, he discovered exactly where its limits were. He wanted her, wanted to place her on his bed, unwrap the cloak, and learn every inch of the woman beneath it. He would not. She was drunk. He would never take advantage of that. But gods, he wanted to. She lifted her head. There was a tiny mole near the corner of her mouth. Luther stared at it. He wanted to touch it, taste it. "You're so warm," she whispered in wonder. His body was registering everything. Her thighs across his lap, her chest pressed against him. Her scent, wine, sweetness, and unmistakable arousal. She wanted him too. The knowledge nearly shattered what remained of his discipline. "Why didn't you come to dinner?" The question escaped before Luther had consciously decided to ask it. She blinked. "Dinner? You were supposed to meet me." He heard the accusation in his own voice and disliked it. "You didn't come." Her drunken happiness softened immediately. "Oh." She reached up. Her palm touched his jaw. "I'm sorry." Luther became completely still. Her thumb moved gently across his cheek. "You're lonely," she whispered. It was not a question. Luther said nothing. "You were waiting," she continued, "and no one came." Something inside him tightened. She shifted in his lap. Luther nearly groaned. Then both her arms curled around his neck again. "I'm sorry you were lonely." His arms closed around her almost without permission. He could feel every breath she took. And beneath the heat, the scent, the confusion, and the overwhelming desire, something deeper moved through him. Certain, ancient, absolute. His wolf knew. She was his mate. This tiny, intoxicated woman who looked at him without fear, who touched him as though he were not dangerous, who seemed to see a lonely man where everyone else saw a monster. Luther wanted her. More dangerously, he already wanted to keep her. Forever. Her eyes began to close. "I think I love you a little bit," she mumbled, the words running together. "Isn't that silly?" Then she fell asleep. Just like that. Curled around him. Trusting him completely. Luther sat motionless on the bed with the sleeping woman in his arms, and felt the entire shape of his future shift around her. Chapter 3. Rosie returned to consciousness slowly. For several wonderful seconds, everything was warm. Everything smelled extraordinary. She had never slept so well in her life. Then she realized the warmth beside her was not a pillow. Rosie opened her eyes. An enormous man was asleep only inches away. Even unconscious, he was almost offensively handsome. Then the memories attacked. The wine, the dare, the chamber, the bath, the man, and finally, "I think I love you a little bit." Rosie stopped breathing. She had actually said that, to a stranger, while naked, in his bath. Oh gods! She moved with agonizing care, 1 inch at a time, off the mattress, onto the cold floor. Her dress lay nearby. Rosie pulled it on as quickly as possible, barely bothering to lace it properly. His cloak had fallen to the floor. She picked it up. For reasons she could not explain, she carefully folded it and placed it nearby. He had lent it to her. It seemed wrong to leave it crumpled. She looked at him one last time. She could not help herself. Then she slipped through the door. Rosie moved quickly through the corridors. Somehow she reached the servants' quarters without meeting anyone important. Fine. Everything was fine. No one had seen her. Nobody knew. The memory of his arms around her rose again. Her face burned. She had told him she loved him. Rosie wanted the floor to open and swallow her. The kitchens were already busy with morning preparations. Nobody paid much attention when she entered. Marta was talking across one of the work tables. Did you hear? The Alpha King got stood up last night. Rosie reached for a pitcher. Anne lowered her voice. The Alpha King? Luther? Princess Parisa's fiancé? Apparently, Marta said. The whole West Wing was cleared for him. Rosie barely listened. West Wing. She had been in the... She frowned. Had she been in the East Wing? She thought she had. Yes. Surely. 20 minutes later, 2 stewards appeared near the kitchen entrance. The king is searching for someone, one said. Quite desperately, apparently. The other steward raised an eyebrow. Who? The princess. Rosie's hands slowed. The first steward leaned closer. Apparently she went to his chambers last night. Alone? And fell asleep there. The second man's eyes widened. In his bed? Rosie nearly dropped the pitcher. She caught it just in time. The princess? The second steward said. That doesn't sound like her. They say she was drunk. Princess Parisa? Stumbling like a sailor. The first steward lowered his voice further. And this is the best part. The king found her in his bath. He paused dramatically. Naked. The kitchen seemed to tilt. Rosie gripped the pitcher. West Wing. Miss Harrow had said West Wing. Hadn't she? Third door on the left. Rosie stared into nothing. Or had she said East? The memory was blurred by wine. Then certainty arrived. Cold. Terrible. Oh no, Rosie whispered. She had gone into the Alpha King's chambers. She had taken off her clothes in the Alpha King's room. She had climbed into the Alpha King's bath. And she had invited the Alpha King himself to join her. Worse. He thought she was Princess Parisa. And now he was looking for her. Rosie made a small, horrified sound. Then she ran. She escaped into a little courtyard tucked behind the laundry buildings and pressed herself against the warm stone wall. Breathe. She needed to breathe. Perhaps she could hide. Perhaps she could leave the palace. Perhaps she could become a shepherd somewhere very far away, where no kings ever visited. There you are. Rosie spun around. A woman stood at the courtyard entrance. Tall, elegant, beautiful in the effortless way of someone who had always known exactly how beautiful she was. Rosie's stomach dropped. She knew that face. Princess Parisa. People had occasionally remarked that Rosie resembled the princess. Standing in front of her now, Rosie could finally see why. Similar hair, similar eyes, a similar mouth. But Rosie had the little mole at the corner of her lips. The princess did not. Parisa stepped forward. I know what you did. Rosie's mouth dried. Your Highness, Last night, Parisa continued calmly, you drank wine. Rosie swallowed. Quite a lot of it, according to what I've heard. Not that much. And then, Parisa continued over her, you entered a lord's chambers and climbed into his bath. Something like disbelief crossed her face. Except those chambers did not belong to an ordinary lord. Rosie wanted to disappear. They belonged to the Alpha King, my intended husband. Your Highness. Rosie dropped to her knees. Parisa's expression remained cool. King Luther, the man I am supposed to marry, the man my father has spent 6 months negotiating an alliance with, currently believes that you are a princess. Rosie shook her head quickly. But I'm not. No, Parisa agreed. You are not. Her gaze hardened. You are a maid. Rosie flinched. More specifically, King Luther believes that you are me, Princess Parisa, his fiancée. She took another step. And he is currently tearing through this palace, searching for the woman he believes visited him last night. Rosie's hands trembled. I didn't mean any of it. Intent is not your greatest problem. Parisa lifted one elegant finger. You committed theft. The wine came from the royal cellars. A second finger. Trespassing. His chambers were restricted. A third. Impersonating a member of the royal family. He called you princess and you confirmed it. Rosie's face drained of color. And potentially treason, Parisa added, depending on how my father chooses to interpret what happened. I didn't mean to impersonate anyone. Parisa raised her hand. Rosie immediately fell silent. Do you understand what is at stake? Rosie shook her head faintly. My father and Luther's council have spent months arranging this marriage. The alliance is supposed to secure our borders, establish trade routes, and prevent a war. Parisa stared down at her. And one drunken maid may have just destroyed it. I'm sorry, Rosie whispered. I'm so sorry. I never meant. When the truth becomes known, there will be consequences. Rosie's breathing stopped. What kind? For you? Parisa's voice cooled. At minimum, you will never work in a noble household again. Rosie's heart sank. More likely, my father will make an example of you. 6 months in a work camp, perhaps more. Rosie began trembling harder. Impersonating royalty is worse. That could mean prison. The courtyard suddenly felt too small. And if my father is especially angry. Parisa paused. What? Rosie whispered. He may call it treason. Rosie understood before the princess finished. They do not usually send people to prison for treason. The words seemed to hang between them. Exile, Parisa said, if you're fortunate. She leaned closer. More likely, hanging. Rosie made a broken sound. Please. She clasped her hands. Please, Your Highness. Have mercy. I didn't know. I was drunk and stupid and I never meant. I know. Parisa's voice suddenly softened. I believe you. Hope flickered. Unfortunately, what you intended does not change what happened. Rosie's thoughts filled with prison cells, work camps, a rope. Then, for one terrible second, she thought about Luther's face when he discovered that the woman he had held so gently was only a drunken servant. Her chest hurt. Parisa examined her fingernails. Well, Rosie looked up. I suppose there may be another option. Hope struck so sharply that it almost hurt. Anything. Parisa looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Good. She stepped closer. Here is what you're going to do. Chapter 4. Luther stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, as evening settled over the courtyard. He had not spent the entire day pacing his chambers like a caged wolf. Absolutely not. He was a king. He had commanded armies. He had stared across negotiation tables at enemy generals. He routinely made decisions that affected thousands of lives. He was not nervous about dinner with one tiny woman. Princess Parisa, Louis announced. Luther turned. There she was. His princess. She was even prettier than he remembered. Small and delicate enough to awaken every protective instinct he possessed. The curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips, and at the corner of her mouth, that tiny dark mole he remembered far too well. Princess, Luther said quietly. Rosie visibly jumped. Her eyes widened. Then she attempted a curtsy. It was, without question, the worst curtsy Luther had ever witnessed. Uneven, wobbly, clearly improvised. He found it completely charming. Your Highness, she said breathlessly. Several attendants sharply inhaled. Rosie's face immediately turned scarlet. Wrong title. Your Majesty, she corrected quickly. I'm sorry. Oh gods, I'm so sorry. It's quite all right, Princess. Luther deliberately softened his voice. You may call me Luther if you prefer. Her lips parted. She stared at him. I shouldn't, Your Majesty. Luther studied her. She was terrified. This was nothing like the woman from the previous night who had curled around him as though his arms were the safest place in the world. Tonight she looked as though a sudden sound might send her running. There was something unsettling in her scent as well. Fear. Was she afraid of him? Of course she was. Everyone was. Luther felt the familiar disappointment settle inside him. Then Rosie frowned. Are you all right, Your Majesty? Luther blinked. What? You looked. Her nervousness seemed to vanish for a moment as she stepped closer. Upset, almost sad. Her brow furrowed. Are you all right? Luther stared. She had sensed his distress. I'm fine, he said roughly. Rosie continued watching him. Then, carefully, she reached out and touched his arm with only her fingertips. Luther forgot how to breathe. There she was, the woman from last night, still kind, still concerned about him, only sober and painfully shy. He would be careful, patient, gentle. Whatever time she needed, he would give it. I'm glad you came. He offered his arm. Her fingers curled around his sleeve. They were small and warm, and he could feel their faint trembling. He guided her toward the table and pulled out her chair. Slowly, he reminded himself. Do this properly. Luther sat across from her. He tried not to focus on her scent, or the way candlelight caught in her hair. Rosie's attention had settled on the table, specifically the silverware. She stared at the collection of forks, knives, and spoons, as though someone had presented her with an ancient code and demanded she decipher it. Is something wrong? Luther asked. No. Her answer came far too quickly. She looked up. Nothing at all. Luther decided not to press. Would you like wine? He reached toward the bottle. Rosie's eyes became enormous. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. Luther stopped. I didn't mean to last night. Oh gods, last night. I shouldn't have. Please forgive me. Her panic rose so quickly that Luther could smell it. Princess. I shouldn't have been there at all. I should never have gotten into your bath, and then I fell asleep, and you were so kind, and I was completely inappropriate, and Luther was out of his chair before he consciously chose to move. He crossed the distance between them and gently caught her upper arms. Please. His voice lowered. Rosie finally stopped. Luther bent slightly so their eyes were level. Please don't be embarrassed. Her breathing was still too fast. I was enchanted. She blinked. By what? Our meeting. He hesitated. By you. Her lips parted. You were. He stopped, searching for words that would not frighten her. Truthfully, Parisa, I've thought of almost nothing else since. Rosie stared. Really? Something hopeful entered her voice. Luther's hand rose before he could stop it. He cupped her cheek. How could I not? His thumb brushed her skin. You were a vision. Her eyes widened. And when I woke this morning and discovered you gone, he exhaled. I have been counting the time until I could see you again. Rosie leaned into his palm. Only slightly. But she did it. Oh. She looked up at him. I thought about you too, Your Majesty. They were too close. Luther could see every detail of her face, especially that mole beside her mouth, the one he had spent far too much time imagining tasting. Then her scent shifted. Warm, sweet, unmistakable. Arousal. His mate wanted him. Luther's restraint suffered a serious blow. His thumb moved. Very gently, he brushed it across her lower lip. Rosie made a soft sound. A breathy, involuntary moan. The sound went through Luther like lightning. Her lips parted beneath his thumb. For one dangerous moment, he felt her warm breath against his skin and imagined those lips somewhere else. Then Rosie's eyes went wide with horror. She slapped a hand over her mouth. I should go. She jumped up. Her face was bright red. She smelled mortified, and still very much aroused. Luther immediately stepped back. Too fast. He had pushed too quickly. Even if her scent suggested fear was not the problem, he would not pressure her. Aren't you hungry? He asked gently. No. Rosie glanced around as though searching for a route to the door. Luther's heart sank. You don't wish to have dinner? She blinked. Oh, yes, no, I don't. She squeezed her eyes shut in frustration. What do you want? I mean, what? Luther nearly smiled. Perhaps dessert. Rosie stopped. If you aren't hungry, he continued quickly, we could simply have dessert. Dessert? Hope entered her voice. Yes. She considered. I suppose. Luther waited. Maybe. Relief flooded him. Excellent. He turned toward the servants. Bring dessert. Then, after a moment, everything in the kitchens. The servants obeyed literally. An absurd amount of food soon appeared. Cakes, pastries, glazed fruits, cream, chocolate, sugared delicacies. Rosie stared at the table. For the first time all evening, she looked completely comfortable. She picked up a small spoon with the confidence of someone who had finally encountered something she understood. She tried the cake. Her eyes closed. A pleased little sound escaped her. The same kind of sound she had made when Luther touched her mouth. Good? He asked. His voice sounded strained even to himself. It was not technically a word. It communicated everything. Luther attempted not to imagine other situations in which she might make that sound. He failed. Completely. But the important thing was that her fear had disappeared. This was the woman he remembered. Warm, unprotected, real. This is wonderful, Rosie said softly. You're very kind. Kind. She had called him that before. That mattered more than it should have. She did not look at him and see a weapon. She did not see the terrifying king from all the stories. She saw him. And somehow she thought he was kind. Luther knew then exactly what he intended to do. He would marry this woman. But he would court her properly first. He would earn her trust. He would make her feel safe beside him. He would be patient. No matter how violently every instinct inside him demanded that he claim his mate immediately. Across the table, Rosie smiled around another spoonful of cake. Then she licked a trace of cream from her lower lip. Luther's fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. Patience. He was going to do this correctly, even if it killed him. Chapter 5. Rosie returned to Princess Parissa's chambers in a state that could only generously be described as dazed. She felt warm everywhere. Her cheek still remembered Luther's palm. Her mouth still remembered the touch of his thumb. She stepped inside. Parissa was waiting. The warmth vanished instantly. Well? Rosie opened her mouth. It went well. Parissa narrowed her eyes. Define well. He was very kind. Rosie clasped her hands. And we had dessert and… Did he end the engagement? Rosie stopped. No. Did he show any sign whatsoever that he no longer wishes to marry me? Not exactly. Parissa stared. Not exactly? Her expression tightened. Rosie, let me make your purpose absolutely clear. Your one responsibility is to make Luther end this engagement. I know. My father will not accept me refusing him. It would be viewed as disobedience and as jeopardizing the alliance. Parissa paced slowly. The only acceptable solution is for Luther himself to decide he does not want the marriage. Rosie nodded. Yes, Your Highness. And yet, after tonight, he appears more interested than before. Rosie winced. You need to discourage him. I did call him by the wrong title. Parissa stared at her. Rosie lowered her eyes. The purpose, Parisa said with extraordinary patience, is to make him lose interest in a princess, not to accidentally reveal that the princess he is speaking to isn't a princess. Rosie's stomach tightened. If Luther discovers the deception, Parisa continued, if he learns that you have been pretending to be me, he could have you executed immediately. I understand. Parisa studied her. Then her eyes narrowed. Are you attracted to him? No. The answer came instantly. Of course not. Rosie shook her head much too quickly. No. Why would I be? Absolutely not. Parisa stared without expression. Your scent says otherwise. Rosie froze. You smell as though you're one good opportunity away from falling into bed with him. An image appeared in Rosie's mind before she could stop it. Luther above her. His hands on her skin. His mouth. Rosie made a strangled sound. Parisa closed her eyes briefly. I'm sorry, Rosie rushed to say. I just... Listen to me. The princess stepped closer. Luther is interested because he believes you are Princess Parisa, a woman raised with the status, education, and training expected of a future queen. Rosie's excitement faded. He would not look twice at an ordinary maid. The words landed heavily. Do you understand? Rosie nodded. You are nobody pretending to be somebody. Parisa's voice remained level. The instant the illusion disappears, you become nothing again. Rosie's throat tightened. You're a servant who became drunk and impersonated royalty. The only reason you're not already sitting in a cell is that, at the moment, you're useful. Of course. Rosie was proud that her voice remained steady. Parisa turned away. I considered handling this myself, but I couldn't risk my father learning that I had deliberately refused to cooperate. She glanced back. If this goes badly, I need someone he can blame. Rosie's chest constricted. You are, unfortunately, perfect for that purpose. Rosie swallowed. Thank you for reminding me. Her sadness surprised even her. She lowered her head. I'm sorry, Your Highness. I'll do better. The next morning, Luther arranged to walk with the princess through the palace gardens. Before Rosie could go, Parisa's maids prepared her. They styled her hair in an elaborate arrangement that Rosie was certain she could never recreate on her own. Then they brought the dress. Light green, soft and beautiful, like new leaves. Arms up, one maid ordered. Rosie obeyed. They dressed her efficiently. Then came the corset. It laced in front, and once tightened, Rosie felt as though her ribs had become someone else's property. I can't breathe. One maid looked delicately at Rosie's chest. Well, you are considerably more gifted than Her Highness. Rosie's entire face heated. Her breasts were admittedly difficult to ignore. Isn't this a little too tight? It's all we have, another maid said apologetically. There hasn't been enough time to have dresses made specifically for you. By the time Rosie reached the gardens, she had managed to transform absolute terror into something that, from a distance, might resemble composure. Luther was already waiting. The sight of him in daylight did deeply unhelpful things to her heartbeat. Good morning, Princess. His voice was gentle. Rosie took the arm he offered. They began walking. She became immediately aware of everything about him. His height, his width, the extraordinary difference between their bodies. He was so much larger that it bordered on absurd. He could do almost anything he wanted to her, Rosie thought helplessly. And, disturbingly, she suspected she would not object. Focus. She needed to make him dislike her. That was the entire purpose. Except Luther was being unbearably considerate. He softened his voice around her. He shortened his stride to match hers without mentioning it. He positioned himself between her and low branches. Every tiny kindness made her task harder. Are you enjoying the gardens? Luther asked. Yes. Rosie fought for breath. They're beautiful. Not as beautiful as you. Rosie made a tiny squeaking sound, then forgot how lungs worked entirely. They turned down a narrow path. The attendants following them remained farther behind, granting them privacy. Rosie's breaths became increasingly shallow. Luther noticed. "Are you all right?" His eyes dropped toward her chest. Rosie immediately flushed. The corset was too tight. The day was too warm. Luther was too close. "Yes." Her voice sounded far away. "Perfectly well." Dark spots appeared at the edges of her vision. "Princess?" Concern sharpened Luther's voice. Rosie's knees collapsed. An arm instantly caught her waist. Luther pulled her upright against his chest. Rosie breathed in. His scent surrounded her. "You smell divine," she murmured weakly. Luther went very still. "My lady." His voice became careful. "I believe your corset is too tight." Rosie blinked. "What?" He called for assistance. No one answered. Their servants were too far away. Luther looked down at her. "May I?" Rosie had no idea what he intended. At that moment, she would have agreed to almost anything. "Yes." Luther gently moved her hands aside. Then his fingers found the front laces of her corset. Rosie's mind stopped functioning. He was so close. She could smell him properly now. Could feel the heat from his hands against her body. His fingers worked carefully at the laces. He loosened them only enough to allow her ribs to expand. Rosie sucked in a deep, glorious breath. "Oh!" Luther's eyes darkened slightly. "Better?" "Much." He adjusted the laces again so the dress would remain secure. His hands were only inches from her breasts. Careful, gentle, and catastrophically distracting. Rosie was certain this qualified as torture. When he finally stepped away, she was still gripping his arm. "I'm so sorry, Your Majesty."
"Don't be."
His voice was warm. "Are you all right now?" Rosie nodded. Luther did not move. He was staring at her, his face lowered. Rosie recognized what was about to happen. He was going to kiss her. This was a terrible idea. Possibly the worst idea she had ever had. Which, considering the bath incident, was impressive. "Yes?" Luther asked softly. His lips hovered only inches from hers. Rosie did not think. She grabbed him and kissed him first. The moment their mouths met, every sensible thought vanished. Luther's body pressed against hers. Solid, warm, powerful. His hands came up to cradle her face. His mouth moved over hers. Then his tongue touched hers. Rosie's entire body went weak. This was her first kiss, and some distant part of her knew with absolute certainty that nothing else would ever compare. She gave herself another second. Then another. She pressed closer. Her hands moved across the hard plane of his chest. Luther deepened the kiss. Rosie wanted more. Much more. That realization finally terrified her enough to break away. She pushed at his chest. "I should go." She left before her courage failed. Parisa was waiting when Rosie returned. One look at Rosie's face was enough. "The blushing," the princess said flatly, "needs to stop." Rosie touched her cheeks. "All you're doing is enchanting him more." Parisa looked exhausted. "He appears completely smitten." Rosie's heart leaped before she could stop it. "You think he's smitten?" The hope in her voice was humiliating. Parisa looked as though she was seriously considering throwing herself from the nearest cliff. Chapter 6. The plan was simple. Rosie repeated it to herself every morning for 5 days. Make him not want to marry you. That was all. Simple, straightforward. Something any reasonably competent person should have been capable of achieving. Rosie was rapidly becoming convinced that she was not a reasonably competent person. Parisa's first idea involved greed. "Be demanding," the princess instructed. "Men hate feeling like a walking treasury." That night Rosie practiced in front of her mirror. "I want new shoes." She tried to sound arrogant. "And I am not sorry. Not terrible." The next morning she found Luther in the garden, studying a document. He looked up. His expression softened the moment he saw her. Rosie's prepared speech immediately began to collapse. I would like… Luther tilted his head. Rosie's courage disappeared. If it isn't too much trouble, and please tell me if it is, because you absolutely shouldn't feel obligated. But could I perhaps have some shoes? She finished weakly. Luther smiled. How many? Rosie should have known that was a disastrous sign. Within an hour, attendants began arriving at her rooms carrying boxes, jewelry, 20 dresses embroidered with gems, and 50 pairs of matching slippers. A handwritten note rested on top. Wear whichever you like. The handwriting was surprisingly neat for a man with hands that looked capable of crushing stone. Rosie sat among mountains of expensive fabric and felt genuinely guilty. Parisa entered later. Did you at least sound demanding? Rosie did not answer. The princess sighed. Her second idea was more logical. Show him your accomplishments. Rosie brightened. Or, Parisa clarified, your catastrophic lack of them. That opportunity arrived when Luther asked whether she played the piano. The actual Princess Parisa apparently loved music. Rosie did not. But she sat at the instrument anyway, placed her fingers on the keys, and began. What followed was technically music only in the same sense that a building fire might technically be considered decorative lighting. Rosie stopped. Silence filled the room. Then Luther applauded. I have never heard anything quite like that. Rosie turned slowly. You're making fun of me. She had become surprisingly good at reading him during the last several days. There was no mockery in his face, none in his scent either. Luther crossed the room. He sat beside her on the bench. You are enchanting, he said softly, no matter what you do. Rosie stared at the piano keys. You've completely bewitched me. Oh dear. Later that evening, Rosie stood before Parisa. He said I was enchanting. Parisa stared at the ceiling. For a very long time. Then sighed. The jealousy experiment began, as many of Rosie's worst situations did, with something she said without intending to. She had returned from a court gathering after watching Luther spend a long time speaking with a noblewoman. Rosie casually mentioned that she was certain Luther had meant nothing by it. Obviously, more accomplished women would naturally hold his interest better. It was fine. She was completely fine. Parisa slowly lowered her cup. You sound jealous. Rosie opened her mouth. No convincing argument appeared. She closed it again. Parisa's eyes sharpened. Good. Rosie frowned. Use it. The princess's reasoning was straightforward. Jealousy was possessive. Possessiveness was demanding. And demanding women were supposedly irritating. But I have no right to be jealous, Rosie protested. I'm nobody. He's… Stop thinking about reality, Parisa interrupted. Imagine that he actually chose you. Rosie's chest tightened. Now imagine him leaving you for someone more appropriate. Parisa paused. Because that is what happens to women like you. The words were brutally effective. Far too effective. Rosie imagined it. Luther turning away, his attention shifting toward a woman who knew how to behave in court. Someone educated. Someone elegant. Someone born to stand beside a king. She imagined his warmth disappearing from her life. By the time she entered that afternoon's gathering, she was no longer pretending to be jealous. She stood near a window. Across the room, Luther was speaking with someone. Rosie felt grief seize her almost instantly. Luther found her within minutes. What's wrong? Nothing. The lie was terrible. Rosie looked down. She swallowed. I know eventually you'll… The words refused to come. She tried again. I know this won't last. Luther became still. That's all. He reached out. One finger slipped beneath her chin. He tilted her face upward until she had to meet his eyes. You are the only one. Rosie stopped breathing. Since the night I found you, I have not looked at another woman. His voice remained quiet. Certain. I couldn't if I tried. Rosie's eyes burned. You have completely undone me, And I've discovered that I have absolutely no desire to be put back together. Rosie kissed him. She did not decide to. It simply happened. Like gravity. The inevitable result of 6 days spent trying to push him away while every part of her wanted to move closer. Luther responded immediately. His hands moved from her face to her waist. He pulled her against him. Rosie made a helpless sound. Something about that sound changed him. His grip tightened. He backed her up. 1 step, 2, 3, until her shoulders met the wall. His mouth remained on hers. Rosie's hands filled with the fabric of his shirt. "Please," she whispered. She was not even certain what she was asking for. One of Luther's hands settled at her hip. He held her in place while his body pressed closer. Rosie could feel exactly how much he wanted her. The realization sent heat through her. The door opened. An attendant stood there. Her eyes immediately moved, somewhere very far from the couple against the wall. "Your Majesty." Luther stopped. "The princess is needed. Urgently." Luther looked as though stopping had caused him actual physical pain. Slowly, he lowered Rosie's leg back to the floor. His forehead touched hers. Soon. The word was almost a vow. Rosie walked back to Parisa's rooms in a daze. The princess stared at her. "You are the single most useless saboteur in the history of this kingdom." Rosie considered that. "That seems fair." Parisa stood. "There's one more option." Rosie looked up. "What is it?" The princess explained. Rosie immediately regretted asking. Chapter 7. A compromising situation, Parisa announced. Rosie stared. "You will be discovered with another man, in circumstances that leave no room for misunderstanding." It took several seconds for Rosie to understand. When she did, the blood drained from her face. "You want Luther to believe that I—" She could not finish. Parisa continued as though they were discussing seating arrangements. "Luther will be directed to the room at precisely the correct moment. He will see you with the man. The engagement becomes impossible. He ends it himself." The image struck Rosie painfully. Luther opening a door, seeing her, the trust in his eyes disappearing, that warmth, that patience, turning into hurt. "No." Parisa paused. "Nothing will actually happen," she said. "We'll control the timing." Rosie shook her head. "The man has already been chosen. He's discreet, cooperative, and being paid extremely well. I would never expect you to actually—" "I don't care about that." Rosie's voice sharpened. "I won't do it." "Rosie." "No." She stood. "You can't ask me to do that to him." Her stomach turned. "He doesn't deserve it." Parisa watched silently. "I can't hurt him like that." Rosie's voice broke. "It's cruel." The princess remained quiet for several moments. Then her expression changed. "Let me remind you of your position." Cold settled in Rosie's stomach. "You have been impersonating a princess for weeks. Because you told me to. And who will believe you?" Rosie froze. Parisa's voice remained calm. "What matters is how the story sounds. A scheming maid manipulated a king." She tilted her head. "Whose version do you think people will believe?" "Your Highness, please." Rosie's eyes filled. "I'll do anything else." She stepped closer. "Punish me. Send me to prison if you must. Exile me." Her throat closed. "But don't ask me to do this. Don't ask me to hurt him like that." "Rosie." Parisa's voice softened. "You are a maid." The words landed like stones. "He is engaged to me. To Princess Parisa." She paused. "He does not know you exist." Rosie could not speak. "What exactly do you imagine will happen?" "Nothing." She had no answer. "The deception has to end." Parisa moved closer. "There is no version of this story where it continues forever." Rosie lowered her eyes. "And when it ends, when Luther discovers he has spent weeks courting a servant, how do you think he will feel?" Rosie tried to respond. Parisa did not let her. What is your plan? Her tone sharpened. Do you imagine you'll become his queen? Rosie flinched. Rule beside him? The princess studied her. Do you even know the full name of the kingdom he rules? Rosie went still. The complete formal name, Parisa continued. The name written into treaties you would be expected to understand. The ancestry of his royal line? Rosie's cheeks heated. The line of succession? Silence. The political consequences of your marriage for neighboring territories? Rosie's hands curled together. Do you even know where his kingdom is on a map? No. The answer barely escaped. But what? Parisa's voice became almost gentle. You love him, so nothing else matters? Rosie's eyes filled with tears. Women who marry kings are educated for that responsibility from birth. Parisa began listing things Rosie had barely heard of. Governance, diplomacy, trade agreements, military strategy. She stopped. You know none of it. Rosie felt smaller with every word. You don't even know how much you don't know. I could learn. Rosie's voice became desperate. Parisa walked to a shelf. She removed a book and handed it to Rosie. Can you read this? Rosie looked down. The page might as well have been written in another language. Her face burned. Can you? Parisa asked again. Rosie's fingers trembled. I love him. It was all she had left. Parisa's expression softened only slightly. That may be true. She took the book back. But love does not automatically make you a queen. Rosie's chest felt as though it were collapsing. At best, Parisa continued, this ends, and everything returns to the original plan. Luther and I marry. The alliance proceeds. She looked away. And I cannot let that happen. Rosie lifted her head. Why? For the first time, Parisa looked vulnerable. Because there is someone I love. Rosie stared. It isn't Luther. The princess's voice was quiet. It will never be Luther, no matter how patient or kind he is. She looked directly at Rosie. So will you help me? A pause. One last time. Parisa's voice softened further. So none of us is forced into a life we cannot bear. Rosie looked down at her hands. She thought of Luther, his smile, his voice, his promise that she was the only woman he could see. And she understood that she had never truly been the woman he believed she was. All right, Rosie whispered. Chapter 8. Luther was in his study when one of the princess's attendants rushed through the door. Your Majesty. She was breathless. The princess. She asked me to bring you. Luther was already standing before she finished. The east wing was unusually quiet. He reached the blue receiving room, opened the door, and stopped thinking. A man was touching his mate. Everything inside Luther went red. Wrong. The sight was wrong. Her scent hit him next. Fear. Sharp. Acrid. She did not want this. Which meant the man had... Luther crossed the room before conscious thought caught up. His hand closed around the man's throat. Luther. Parisa's voice reached him from somewhere distant. He barely heard it. His vision had narrowed. The man choked. Luther, please. Something in her tone reached him. Not the words. The fear. Desperation. Luther froze. His hand opened. The man stumbled backward. Get out. Luther barely raised his voice. He did not need to. The man fled. Parisa remained against the wall. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. And she was looking at Luther with the one expression he had spent weeks trying to prevent. Fear. His rage disappeared. Anguish replaced it. She was afraid of him. His mate was afraid. He had been patient, careful, gentle. He had done everything he knew to prove he would never become the monster people described, and in one instant he had failed. He needed to fix it. Are you all right? Parisa stared. Did he hurt you? Luther searched her face. Did he force you to? No. Her answer came quickly. No, he didn't. Luther exhaled. Then are you angry with me? He stepped closer. Did I do something? No. Her voice cracked. Luther understood nothing. He approached slowly, then opened his arms. Not an order, an invitation. She moved into them. Her face pressed against his chest. Her hands clutched his shirt. She was trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. Luther wrapped his arms around her. You have nothing to apologize for. She pulled back enough to look at him. I cannot marry you. Luther frowned. The words made no sense. I didn't know how to tell you. She began speaking too quickly. I tried to tell my father, but he wouldn't listen, and I didn't know what else to do, and Luther gently moved back so he could see her face. Why? His voice was soft. Did I frighten you? He thought of the man he had nearly strangled. Just now, when I grabbed him. Did I? No. She shook her head. No, it's not that. Her distress flowed through the bond. Sharp. Overwhelming. Then help me understand. Luther cupped her cheek. Please. His thumb moved across her skin. Whatever this is, we can't. She was crying harder. There's no fixing this. I'm not angry. Luther held her face gently. I only need you to tell me what is happening. Rosie took a broken breath. There's someone else. Luther stared. The words did not register. Someone else? I'm sorry. She looked as though she were breaking apart. I should have told you from the beginning. Luther's wolf began snarling. No. The bond inside him screamed the same answer. No. She was his mate, the woman who had touched his face and understood that he was lonely. The woman who had looked past everything terrifying about him and called him kind. And she wanted him to let her go to another man? Every instinct Luther possessed demanded that he refuse. He could persuade her. He could remind her what existed between them. He could fight. He could command. Then he looked at her face, at the fear there, and one thought cut through everything else. If I force her, I become exactly what everyone believes I am. Luther lowered himself. Rosie stared. The Alpha King, a man who had never knelt willingly before anyone, went down on one knee in front of her. You consume me, he said. His voice was quiet, raw. Since the night I found you, there hasn't been a moment when I haven't thought about you. Rosie's tears fell. I want to be near you. His voice broke slightly. My only wish is to remain beside you, to make you happy. He swallowed. To become worthy of. Luther stopped, then looked up at her. Please. Rosie made a broken sound. Give me a chance. You are so kind. The words came through her tears. But I cannot be yours. Luther's heart seemed to stop. There is someone else. She forced herself to continue. I already gave my heart away. Luther searched her face. You truly don't wish to be mine. I can't be. The answer was barely a whisper. There is a mate bond between us. Rosie froze. You must feel it. Luther stood again. I know you do. Her lips parted. If you truly choose another person despite that bond, then reject it. Rosie's eyes widened. Formally. Luther forced each word out. And I will not fight your choice. She stared at him. Her breathing shook. Then she closed her eyes. I reject the mate bond. 6 words. That was all. It felt like dying. Luther had been stabbed. Shot. He had stood wounded on battlefields and continued fighting. Nothing had ever hurt like this. The warmth that had lived constantly inside his chest for weeks disappeared. The presence of her, gone, as if a door had slammed shut inside him. His vision narrowed. He forced himself to remain upright. Luther reached for her hand. He lifted it to his lips, kissed it once. One final time. I accept your rejection. He meant it. Every part of him hated the words. But he loved her. And because he loved her, her choice had to matter. Luther turned. He walked toward the door without looking back. Louis was waiting outside. Your Majesty? Not now. Luther continued down the corridor. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. The pain grew worse with every step. By the time he reached his chambers, his hands were trembling. Then Luther realized they were not merely shaking. They were changing. Claws pushed through. His wolf was forcing its way out. What? Luther gasped. The shift seized him. He fought it. He had always controlled his transformations. Always. This time his wolf tore free anyway. A howl of pure anguish shook the chamber. Chapter 9. 10 days later, Rosie was still in bed. For crying out loud. Miss Harrow's irritated voice carried through the door. What did she expect? That she could play princess forever? Miss Harrow, please, Anne pleaded. Rosie's having a difficult time. Her heart is broken, Marta added. Rosie heard them from somewhere far away. None of it felt real. Only one thought felt real. It hurts where he used to be. For weeks, she had felt him. A constant warmth in her chest. A steady presence. Something quiet, strong, and certain. She had not understood what it was. Now she knew. The bond. Something sacred. Something beautiful. And she had destroyed it with 6 words. I reject the mate bond. She had rejected him. Her mate. Her king. The man she loved. It had been the right choice. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. The sensible choice. The only choice. Then Rosie remembered Luther's expression when she said the words. The grief in his scent. The pain he had hidden even while respecting her decision. And now there was nothing. Only emptiness. How could something be right when it hurt this much? A hand touched her shoulder. Rosie. Marta's voice softened. Please get up. Rosie stared at the wall. It might help if you work. Anne appeared behind her. Miss Harrow said if you don't help with cleaning today, she's throwing you out. Marta glared. Don't tell her that. It's true. Rosie did not care. Fired. Employed. Here. Somewhere else. It all meant the same thing. Everywhere was somewhere Luther was not. Eventually her friends managed to get her moving. Rosie spent the morning on her knees in a distant corridor, scrubbing floors. Her mind remained trapped in the same sentence. It hurts where he used to be. Then shouting echoed nearby. This is a catastrophe. Rosie paused. An alpha's aura rolled through the corridor. Powerful. Commanding. Your Majesty, we're doing everything we can. For one irrational second, Rosie's heart leaped. Luther? Then she heard the voice properly, smelled the scent. Not him. Her hope collapsed. Marta appeared at the far end of the corridor. Rosie, why are you still here? Come on. Rosie slowly rose. From the room nearby, the alpha continued shouting. Your best? It's been 10 days. How have you failed to bring him back after 10 days? Rosie stopped. Marta waved urgently. Rosie tried to move. Her foot caught the bucket. Water spilled. Marta groaned. But, Your Majesty, another voice said from inside, we've sent our best people. Father, a woman's voice interrupted. Cool, controlled, familiar. Rosie froze. Princess Parisa. Even His Majesty's own men couldn't bring him back. Parisa continued. You cannot blame Captain Jenkins for refusing to sacrifice more soldiers. Rosie's heart began pounding. Bring whom back? What are you doing? Marta mouthed. Rosie ignored her. He is one alpha, the king snapped. Rosie's brow furrowed. One alpha? A feral alpha, Parisa corrected. Not an ordinary one. King Luther was already formidable when he was lucid. The world shifted beneath Rosie's feet. Luther. Come on, Marta whispered. Let's go. Be quiet. Rosie pulled her arm away. Inside the room, another man spoke. The princess is correct, Your Majesty. Even Luther's own blood couldn't calm him. Some men were killed trying to make him see reason. Rosie forgot how to breathe. Killed? Luther had hurt people? This is your fault, daughter, the king growled. I leave for only a few days with the engagement nearly finalized, and I return to discover Luther has gone completely feral and vanished? Rosie was moving before she decided to. What are you doing? Marta hissed. Rosie. Miss Harrow's voice came from behind them. Rosie ignored everyone. She shoved open the door. 3 people turned. Princess Parisa, an older man who could only be her father, the king, and a guard captain in full armor. What happened? Rosie's voice shook. What's wrong with Luther? Is he hurt? The king stared at her. What in the world is this? He pointed at Rosie as though she were something unpleasant someone had dragged inside. Who allowed this creature in here? Your Majesty, my apologies. Miss Harrow arrived and seized Rosie's arm. This maid has been unwell. Remove her. The king waved dismissively. Miss Harrow pulled. Rosie wrenched herself free with a growl. Where is he? She stared at Parisa. What happened? Parisa hesitated. King Luther disappeared after losing control of his wolf. Rosie's face emptied. Losing control? Her voice dropped. How is that possible? The older king sighed. Why are we discussing royal affairs with an insane maid? Nobody answered him. We don't know exactly what occurred, Parisa continued. His chambers were destroyed. Several guards who tried to stop him were injured. Rosie's hand covered her mouth. Then he disappeared into the forest. Which forest? Parisa blinked. When? The king scowled. Child, this is none of your concern. Rosie turned on him. Something in her expression made even the king pause. You are talking about my mate. Silence. It is absolutely my concern. The entire room froze. Parisa's mouth opened. Captain Jenkins stared. The king recovered first. Your mate. His disbelief turned to irritation. Have you completely lost your mind? King Luther is not your mate. Rosie raised her chin. Yes, he is. Her certainty lasted 1 second. He was. Before The words died. Suddenly everything made horrible sense. The rejection. Luther losing control. His wolf taking over. His disappearance. The pain. Oh gods. Rosie went pale. What have I done? Her eyes filled with tears. This is my fault. The king sighed heavily. Someone send her to an asylum. No. Parisa stepped forward. Everyone looked at her. No. I think she's right. Her father stared. What? Parisa turned to Rosie. You had a mate bond with him? Rosie nodded rapidly. Yes. I didn't understand what I was feeling at first, but yes. Parisa's expression changed to alarm. You foolish girl. Rosie flinched. Breaking a mate bond can be dangerous. Parisa's voice sharpened. For some wolves, it can be lethal. The pain alone can destroy control. Rosie's knees weakened. Luther has gone mad with grief. You told me I had to reject him, Rosie cried. Parisa stepped back. I didn't know you were mates. Parisa. Her father sounded furious. Why are you encouraging this servant's delusions? It's not a delusion, father. The princess sounded exhausted. I believe her. The king stared between both women, as though nothing in his kingdom had ever confused him more. Rosie wiped her face. I'll go to him. Captain Jenkins stared. My girl, you don't understand. He shook his head. It's too late. He's not himself anymore. Rosie looked at him. He'll tear you apart. You should see what happened to my soldiers. He paused grimly. The ones who returned. Something fierce rose in Rosie's chest. Protective. Certain. My mate would never hurt me. The captain began to protest. I'll find him. Rosie straightened. And I'll bring him back. Your Majesty, Jenkins said to Parisa's father, we cannot allow this girl to. With all due respect, Rosie interrupted, I'm not asking permission. She turned toward the door. Rosie. Parisa's voice stopped her. Rosie looked back. The princess regarded her quietly. Someone will escort you. Rosie said nothing. And we'll give you a horse. Rosie nodded once, then left. Chapter 10. The horse carried Rosie deeper into the forest behind Captain Jenkins. The path narrowed with every mile. Trees grew thicker. The palace disappeared far behind them. Rosie barely noticed any of it. Her thoughts contained only Luther. Alone. In pain. Feral. Because of her, she had broken their bond because she had been frightened. Because she believed she was not enough. Because she had allowed herself to believe that being a maid meant she could never belong beside him. Now Luther was somewhere in these woods, his humanity slipping away. I'm coming! Rosie gripped the reins. Please, hold on. Captain Jenkins finally stopped beside a river. This is as far as I go. Rosie dismounted. The captain regarded her grimly. He was last seen somewhere beyond here, but miss. He won't hurt me. The captain clearly disagreed. Before he could argue, Rosie caught something on the wind, faint, almost buried beneath the scents of water, trees, and damp earth. Him. Luther. Her heart nearly broke. You can leave. She looked toward the forest. It's better if I'm alone. Jenkins hesitated, then nodded. Rosie waited until the sound of his horse disappeared. Only then did she begin following the scent. She was not a tracker. She had never been trained to hunt. Her wolf senses were hardly exceptional. She had always been submissive-natured, more suited to peaceful pack life than fighting or chasing prey through forests. But she had spent 10 days aching for Luther's scent, starving for it. She could have followed him now through anything. Still, something was wrong. His scent had changed. Darker. Sharper. More aggressive. More animal than man. And beneath everything else was pain. Raw. Devastating. Rosie's eyes filled. I'm coming, she whispered. She pushed through undergrowth. Branches caught her dress. Mud ruined the hem. She did not care. She followed Luther around ancient trees and deeper into the darkening forest. Then a thought stopped her. What if he was truly gone? What if the man she loved could never come back? Rosie stood completely still, then made herself a promise. If Luther was lost forever, she would shift and stay with him. If he could no longer return to human life, then she would follow him into the wild. Whatever he became, he would not be alone. A growl rolled through the trees. Rosie froze. Her wolf immediately warned her to remain still. She obeyed. Something moved in the darkness. Heavy footsteps. Branches snapping. Luther's scent grew stronger. Rosie slowly turned. A wolf stepped between the trees. Enormous. The largest wolf Rosie had ever seen. His fur was so dark it appeared nearly black. His shoulders were massive. His eyes glowed faintly in the fading light. Wild. Unfocused. A continuous growl vibrated through his chest. Rosie's heart stopped. She knew him anyway. Luther. One ear twitched. No recognition appeared in his eyes. Only the growl. It's me. Rosie's voice trembled. The wolf exposed his teeth. He prowled closer. Every muscle in his body coiled. Then he lunged. Rosie hit the ground. Pain shot through her back. The wolf stood above her. Huge. Terrifying. His teeth hovered only inches from her throat. His growl was so deep that Rosie felt the vibration through her bones. For one horrible second, fear took her. Captain Jenkins had been right. She had lost him. Then Rosie looked into those wild eyes. and listened to her own wolf. Slowly, carefully, she tilted her head back. She exposed her throat, a gesture of complete trust. "You don't have to be lonely anymore," she whispered. The growl changed. Confusion entered it. Rosie's eyes filled. "I'm here." The wolf's jaws closed around her neck. Sharp pain flashed. Rosie gasped. Then the bond exploded back into existence. Everything hit her at once. Luther's pain, his despair. 10 days of grief. The terrible emptiness that had driven his wolf beyond control. It crashed through Rosie in waves. Her vision turned white. When she could see again, the wolf was gone. A man was above her. Her man, her king. Luther was naked, one hand braced beside her head, his body pressed against hers. His eyes still glowed faintly gold. He frowned as though forcing his mind through thick fog. "Luther." Rosie lifted a trembling hand. Her palm touched his cheek. His eyes closed. He leaned into her touch and nuzzled her hand as though he had been starving for contact. "Princess?" The word emerged roughly. Confused. Rosie's heart tightened. She held his face between both hands. "I'm not a princess." Luther blinked, his brow furrowed. "What?" He lowered his face to her neck, inhaled deeply. A sound of pure relief escaped him. Rosie wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Claim me." The growl vibrated against her throat. "Claim me back." Rosie's entire body demanded that she obey. But she could not. Not yet. "I can't." Luther froze. His despair slammed through the restored bond so violently that Rosie gasped. She immediately grabbed his face. "No, look at me." His eyes found hers. "I'm not who you think I am." His expression hardened. "Forget the other man." His voice sounded too feral for reason. "You're mine." He pressed closer. "You belong to me." Luther took Rosie's hand. He placed it against his chest. His heart hammered beneath her palm. "There is no other man." Rosie spoke softly. Luther stopped. "There is only you." Confusion replaced rage. "But you said, I'm not Princess Parisa." Rosie's courage nearly failed. "I'm Rosie." He stared. "I'm a maid." Her voice cracked. "I scrub floors." She swallowed. "That's all I am." Silence. Rosie's chest ached. At least Luther was safe. That was what mattered. Even if, after learning the truth, he eventually chose a proper queen, perhaps he would allow Rosie to remain somewhere near him. That would have to be enough. Luther frowned. "What about the other man?" "There wasn't one." Rosie answered immediately. "Parisa, the real Princess Parisa, loves someone else." Luther stared. "She didn't want to marry you, but her father wouldn't let her refuse." Rosie's words rushed out. "That's why I pretended to be her. She needed you to end the engagement yourself." Her eyes filled. "I'm sorry." She could barely look at him. "I wanted so badly to actually be your princess." Luther said nothing. Rosie's voice broke completely. "Because I love you." She looked down. "But I'm nobody." Her tears fell. "I clean floors." She gave a helpless laugh. "I can't even read properly." Luther stared at her as though he were struggling to understand why any of those words mattered. Then, slowly, he smiled. Rosie's breath stopped. She had never seen him smile like that. "There is no other man?" His voice sounded almost hopeful. "Only me?" Rosie blinked. "I don't think you understand what I'm saying." "I don't care what you can or can't do," Luther interrupted. His voice strengthened with every word. "I know exactly what you are." Rosie stopped breathing. "My mate." He leaned closer. "My equal." His forehead touched hers. "The woman I love." Rosie's entire world went silent. Luther's eyes held hers. "Now claim me." His voice dropped. "Make me yours." He touched her face. "As completely as I am yours." Rosie stared at him. Please. Through the bond she felt everything. The need. The aching emptiness of the last 10 days. His love. His wolf waiting for hers. Rosie moved slowly. She never looked away. She lifted herself toward him. Her lips touched the side of his neck. Luther groaned. Please. Rosie bit down. The bond ignited. Warmth flooded through her. Luther's relief. His love. His wolf finally settling with deep, profound satisfaction. Then Luther kissed her. His hands closed around her, and everything beyond them seemed to disappear. The forest. The fear. The deception. For that moment, there was only Luther. Only Rosie. Only the bond alive between them again. Epilogue. Rosie lowered herself carefully into the lukewarm bath and released a long groan of relief. Better? Luther steadied her with both hands as she settled against him. Much. Rosie leaned back. Summer had always been hot. Summer, while 8 months pregnant, felt like punishment from the gods. Especially when she currently felt approximately the size of a small house. Luther's hands moved to her shoulders. He began massaging them with the precise pressure he had perfected over the previous year. Rosie sighed and relaxed against his chest. I seem to remember another bath, Luther murmured near her ear. Rosie smiled. You were considerably smaller then. His mouth brushed her shoulder. And considerably more drunk. I was very drunk. Rosie admitted it freely. And you were surprisingly patient for a man who discovered a naked stranger in his private bath. I was completely undone. Luther corrected her. Rosie turned her head slightly. I believe my exact thought was that I was going to marry you, and I didn't care what it took. Rosie laughed. You thought that while I was sitting naked in your bath asking you to climb in? Approximately 30 seconds after you told me I had a nice voice. He kissed her shoulder. Everything afterward merely confirmed what I already knew. Rosie's hand rested over her belly. Their child was currently moving with enough enthusiasm to suggest serious disagreements about the limited space available. Your air is extremely active today. Luther immediately placed his hand beside hers. His palm seemed to cover half her stomach. His expression softened with the same reverence it always did. Parisa sent word. Rosie relaxed farther against him. She'll arrive next week. She wants to be here for the birth. Good. Luther genuinely meant it. Much had changed during the previous year. Parisa had helped strengthen the alliance between the two kingdoms. More importantly for Rosie, the princess had personally taken responsibility for teaching her everything she had once claimed Rosie could never learn. Reading, protocol, court behavior, politics, diplomacy, the responsibilities of a ruler. Parisa had vouched for Rosie and helped make her transition into queenship possible. Rosie still sometimes looked at her life and struggled to believe it belonged to her. I still can't believe I'm going to be a mother. She looked down at her belly. A year ago I was scrubbing floors. A year ago, you were already my mate. Luther corrected her. You simply didn't know it. Their child kicked directly beneath Luther's palm. His face brightened. He laughed. Strong. His approval was immediate. Rosie smiled. Like their father. Then she remembered something. Their father is supposed to be attending a council meeting. Luther lowered his mouth toward her shoulder. They can wait. You're the king. I am aware. Rosie laughed. Luther wrapped his arms more securely around her. My mate is in a bath. His voice dropped with great seriousness. I have priorities. Rosie laughed again. Luther caught the sound with his mouth. And together they remained in the bath until the water had gone completely cold.